All right, this is Hyperborean Radio. Celtic God is speaking here. With me today, as usual, is the Lore Keeper. If you haven't done it already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, the like button, and ring that little ding-a-ling. We got kind of an odd show for us today, but I think that you guys are going to enjoy it. But before that, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I just want to remind people to make sure to share us around so that we can have more people hear what we have to say. And today we're going to do, as CG just mentioned, something rather odd. Today we're going to be breaking down the Bill of Rights of the United States. I don't know if there's other...
Bill of Rights or the Constitution?
It's the Bill of Rights.
All right.
Not the Constitution.
Okay.
I think that one would be a bit long. But we're doing the Bill of Rights, and we're going to break it down to their pagan roots, or their ethnic faith roots. Again, we don't really like pagan, but it's like shorthand for much longer names. But that's one thing we wanted to do because we got talking about a few things, and I realized that they actually tie into different amendments. So without further ado, I think we're going to just go right into them. All right. Amendment number 1 of the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Take it away, CG.
Well, so yeah, basically what this is all about is, well, for one, they're breaking all of them. The government is breaking all of them between the government and society at large, which is encouraged and defended actually by the government. So take that for what you will. But basically what this means is the government has no right to come in and tell us, I don't know, that we're evil for trying to not merely hold on to traditions, but to retrace back to traditions and traditional sexual roles, I guess, gender roles. I think that's the term most people use because they're afraid to say sexual. But yes, and that we are actually not just allowed, but encouraged to give our opinions on a wide variety of things, that we should be allowed to talk about these things. And the government has no right to step in and do the things that they've been doing, like with Facebook. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with those moves. YouTube, talking to you. But those are private companies. But the government is interfering with them. And the ability to speak freely and to back it up. So it's not just going out in the streets and screaming like a fool. I mean, I suppose that you can, but then in comes another right.
Technically, it is. There used to be like the soapboxes where you get on into the center of town. You know, before Facebook. Right. You know, you had the town crier for your news feed post. You had the paper, and you had guys screaming on top of fruit boxes. Whether that was, you know, the crazy preachers from Life of Brian, politicians. Basically, you got into the center of town and you spoke with verve and gumption and spirit, and some people listened, some people didn't. We've been doing it for a very long time.
Right, but what I mean is like in the current situations right now where people will be having an actual quiet and peaceful protest. And then in comes these other people who scream and yell, and that's where they're supposed to actually stop. That is their First Amendment right. However, it is also our First Amendment right to scream and yell back. This, however, currently is not allowed. And the First Amendment says, government, stay the hell out of it. It's none of your business.
Yes, and to avoid certain things, let's go ahead and call these groups that like to come in and scream Antiphony and Blam. No disservice to the 80s album. But so Antiphony and Blam are, of course, coming in and stopping people from exercising the First Amendment. But what I'm really interested in is not just pointing out how these things are being infringed upon by good old Uncle Sam after he's had one too many sips of alcohol and lobbyist money, but also the pagan roots. Mm-hmm. because it's gone around the interwebs and Texas school books and all sorts of things that America is a Christian nation. Just look at the money. It says, "In God we trust." Ignoring that it used to say "E pluribus unum." Before that, it said "Mind your business." So,
well, yeah, and that's where I was actually getting ready to drag it to, and thank you for actually clarifying it and bringing it up. But debates, basically, that's what it is. It is we are allowed to debate with each other, and the government isn't allowed to get involved by their own rule. They choose not to do this, but it's. You can see it in the debates of the ancient Greeks, which I love the way that they debated, and we should go back to that format. That format in particular, which this doesn't necessarily take it that far, but that format, let's say me and the Lord Keeper was debating about, I don't know, if humans are descended of chickens or bears. And let's say I chose chickens. We can do so in a public square. Everybody can scream at each other. Then out comes the Lord Keeper with a chicken that he plucked, and he sets it down and he says, "Behold, a man." And I become egregiously offended, and I pick up a rock and I stove his skull in, and I stand on his chest and say, "I am the victor." This used to once be a valid means in debate, like Gandalf. I believe. Yeah.
That old meme. Whenever you're in trouble, ask yourself, what would Gandalf do? And remember, beating a motherfucker unconscious with a big stick is a valid option. And you just combined the story with Diogenes, and I think the version you told.
I combined several stories.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of different.
And I did it I did it specifically to be ridiculous, because ridiculous examples actually stick in our minds.
Yes. Well, and those are real. Everything you just mentioned actually happened, just in different stories. You pulled a Hollywood. You combined 5 real characters and shoved them into one. This is kind of the ridiculous thing is people forget that like a huge chunk of philosophers were just basically homeless smart people that went around collecting people that thought they were smart. Mm-hmm. So
and then charging them money to talk to them.
Well, sometimes. Because technically it was tips. It was tips because they couldn't officially charge.
Unless they were licensed.
You got to have a license there, mate. But the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, because in paganism, there are, even though it's a whole breadth of European ethnic faiths, there were different groups. Let's go with that, because cult has a negative connotation in the modern society, but different groups. And this group might venerate Janicot, and this one might venerate Puck, and this one might venerate Krampus, and this one might venerate Velns or Vainamoinen or whatever. And that was perfectly okay.
Well, and true to the whole pagan theme, I'm just going to use that word for sake of ease. Rome didn't actually, for all these worshipers of Oily Josh out there that's saying, but you're lying because Rome persecuted the Oily Josh worshipers. Well, yes and no. They didn't get persecuted simply because they worshipped Oily Josh. What they got persecuted for was, and this is written down, so people that want to take history literally, which seems to be most people, so take this literally, please. Cannibalism of children. Interrupting the sex of other gods, religious ceremonies. Destruction of private property. Disturbing the peace, vandalism, murder, and a couple other things is commonly what they was actually persecuted for, or prosecuted for, whichever word it is that you want to use. It's actually prosecuted, not persecuted.
Well, and this is the whole thing. I mean, it's the equivalent of saying that the Muslims that commit terrorist attacks are being persecuted. Osama bin Laden was so persecuted. Or what's another one? All of the, you know,
The stonings.
the stonings, or, you know, all those sweet, innocent black men that are in prison for, you know, triple homicide. So,
Usually of their own people, thankfully.
yes. But that's essentially what the Christians were. They were domestic terrorists. That's why they were being fed to the lions. I'm not saying fed to the lions is a normal form of execution that we should bring back.
And most of them weren't, actually.
Most of them weren't. But that's the whole thing. And that was why it was gone after. It's because it was batshit crazy. But the only one I can think of is Rome supposedly banned the Bacchanalia because the parties got so fucking out of hand at some point.
I'm aware of what you're talking about. They didn't actually ban it. Ban that. What they did was ban the celebrations on particular days because the celebrations got so out of hand that nobody could sleep or work the next day, usually because they was at those celebrations.
So basically, it was a yearly Woodstock. Everybody was high. Everybody was getting fucked. At least some people died probably in a fist fight. It was a wild time. That's why Bacchanalia is still used to the modern day for what it's used for.
Second Amendment. Otherwise, we won't.
Yeah, we got to get to the Second Amendment. But freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. That's another one that they have definitely been going after. But we're trying to stick to roughly our normal time. So moving on to the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed.
The free man and his knife, need I say any more? And this is actually what brought this topic up for us. So the idea wasn't to be political. It was to point out how these amendments are actually very pagan in origin. So once upon a time, in the long ago, every free man had to carry a knife. This knife is both a weapon and a tool, as all good weapons are. They are both a weapon and a tool, and it symbolized their dedication and the requirement that they had, the responsibility that they had to defend and care for their people. The Second Amendment is a reflection of that. And actually, what I was talking was, what are we going to talk about today? And I was saying, well, I really want to talk about how it is the responsibility of all of our men and all of our women through our ethnic faith to become proficient with various forms of firearms, learning various tactics and techniques, learning how to use ancient weapons as well, learning basic combat techniques. It is the responsibility of every free man and woman to learn these things for the protection and the betterment of our people. And that is basically what the Second Amendment covers.
Yes, women, that means you should probably learn how to fight. Because when the men were away, the women defended the land. That means you knew how to shoot. That means you knew how to fight. And women do not fight the same way men do. Men, on average, can rely on our brute force, our size, our strength. Women have to be more agile. It's almost like dancing when they fight. And that doesn't mean that if you know how to crump, that you can fight.
Well, and there's this other neat thing about the modern weapons is, well, any weapon really, it's a force equalizer. Because it really, to cut human flesh, it takes like 1 pound of pressure or something like that. It's ridiculously easy. Assuming that there's no armor and the person isn't swinging back and all that good stuff. But actually, some of the best shots that I've seen were actually females. But only if they practiced. Only if they practiced. So we don't have to put our women in the front lines. No, women, that's not what we're saying. Us men will gladly go to the front lines. But what would be stopping you from covering us from a distance? In today's world, really nothing.
Well, and people have pointed this out before. Historic female snipers were a thing. Because this is actually one aspect of warfare where women exceed the men. is sniping. And it's not just a white people thing. Like you tell me sometimes about the Japanese lady that they thought was like 12 snipers because she had like a whole obstacle course set up so she could get to different snipers' nests. And this doesn't just apply to the way back when, the long ago. It applies to now. If you are not allowed to own weapons, you are not a free man. That is just a basic fact if you think about it. If you are not allowed to have something to defend yourself, you are enslaved.
Whether you know it or not.
Yes, whether you know it or not. And this actually brings me to an interesting point, which is, first of all, I'd like to do a little advertisement. This won't be for a while because it's on back burner. But I've noticed one thing. If you check out our blog at wilderholmesproject.life, you can find different posts I've done on the gods and bits of folklore and stuff like that, and a few things on homesteading, stuff like that. We're going to keep posting there and diversifying it up. CG's got something coming out. But one thing I'm going to try and get up there in the next few months, hopefully, probably after I've got the Yule issue done on the magazine. I'm going to actually do a deep dive into our lore because this exists. I know that there's a lot of European pagan men that work at jobs that prohibit beards unless there's a religious exclusion, if you're Sikh or something. There is actually, and it's not required. I want to repeat that till the cows come home. There is no requirement for a beard. However, your job doesn't need to know that. So there are actual examples in the lore that I'm hoping to write a whole article on that you can pretty much just use as the jumping off point to go to HR or whatever.
Potentially carrying knives.
Yeah, here's a freebie for you. If you are of Lombardic ancestry or Langobardic, they're the same thing. But it's actually in the pagan lore of that specific European tribe that they grow long beards to honor their god Godin. Just a little freebie there. But what I was getting at is there's actually when you and I used to work at the same place, you actually went to HR and asked if you could carry around a big ass knife because you're a free man, and religious exemption, which like Sikhs, they have to carry around their kirpan or whatever the frick it's called. Their little. It's a knife thing. But you were basically told, what was it, like 20 people? If you could get 20 people to sign a petition, you could actually carry around a big ass knife. Mm-hmm. So take it to your HR, people that want to carry large knives. For all I know, you could be walking around with a machete.
Well, and the reality of it is, if they sign it, just because they want to carry a knife, you still win. It doesn't matter if they worship Oily Josh. If they will sign this thing, just simply so that they can carry a knife, we still win. It's okay. Go ahead. Ask them too. And take it all the way to where it's supposed to be a fighting length knife, which is no less than 6 inches. So even concede to them, I am willing to go to the minimum knife length, which is a 6-inch blade. Of course, this depends on your state because some states don't allow that, or that length, which is, again, our rights being infringed upon. And for the people that's like, that means well-regulated militia. That's like the National Guard. No, it's not, because the federal government sold cannons to private individuals that could afford cannons. Same way with mortars. Same way with warships. They sold war equipment to private citizens, regardless of if they was part of a group or not. So long as they could afford it, it was assumed that they was part of a militia if they could afford this weaponry. That was their intentions.
Well, and mega corporations basically have their own standing armies, so
They call it security.
Yeah. Anyone that's arguing that just me, you, whoever's listening, should not have a weapon in this country, they're not about to stop anyone that can hire their own mini army, so call them on their bullshit. But before we move on to the Third Amendment, I'm just going to say that while it's true that the Greek and Roman traditions heavily influenced the founding of America's government, it's on record from Thomas Jefferson that he largely took influence. I can't speak for the other ones. This is specifically a Thomas Jefferson quote, that he was basing it off the Germanic tradition. He even brings up the Anglo-Saxon ancestors, Hengist and Horsa, who he considered the American government and the American people to be the inheritors of that form of government.
Yeah, and I was just about to address that. The Greek and Roman that we're supposedly based off from is the government structure. The rule system, though, is based off from his perception, Germanic law, but really it was just Hyperborean law across the board.
Yeah, there's similarities across the board for different member groups of our people. But moving into Amendment 3, and this one's probably going to be a wee bit quick. Amendment 3. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law.
Yes, and basically this comes down to a man's home is his castle. He is responsible for it. He has the right and the duty to protect it himself, to keep potential threats out of it, and to take that right away from him, that responsibility away from him, is not the place of the government and is overstepping. It's overstepping their bounds, their responsibility. And of course, there's loopholes in here which has already been exploited by the government, but it's just the way that it is. It comes down to the antiquated meaning of, I said it earlier when we was going through these, eminent domain, which the old usage of it was your home is your home and nobody has the right to come in and say, well, we're taking over your home.
Well, and before I get on to Amendment 4, I'll add my own 2 cents to this. One of the clearest signs that they're messing with people's heads is the use of newspeak. They change the meaning of words. They conflate the meanings of others because with fewer words, people are less capable of being able to express their thoughts. Now, if you can think perfectly in a flash of pictures or something like that, like, sure.
Some people claim to.
Some people claim to. Most people cannot. And the less words you give them, the less they're able to quantify their thoughts.
Well, even if you can, because I really do believe some people can. The words are your ability to communicate these pictures that go through your head. If they lessen the words or they jam more and more of them together until they mean the same thing, then how do you communicate those pictures that went through your head? So words and language are important, and that's why they're doing all this newspeak nonsense. And they're, in some cases, literally changing the definitions of words. In other cases, they're just muddying them right up. So it's all gibberish.
Well, and eventually they'll take it to the point where you can barely intelligibly speak.
It's already there.
It's already there, which is making people not value freedom of speech because what are you even going to do with it? And
speech is thought.
Yes, and words mean different things. Like Yule is now synonymous with Christmas. And it is sort of, but Yule used to be defined as a pagan holiday. Yes. Or folklore, how it used to be known as, it used to be translated as racial memory. Now it's just stories. And I'll just a shout out to Heathen Coalition because she's the one pointed it out in her videos. So, Amendment 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
This one goes with the Third Amendment. The government has no right, no privilege, no reason to infringe upon the privacy and the sanctity of your home. Period. That's what that means. They have to have very good cause with very reliable sources to even begin the process of getting that warrant. Everybody knows this amendment means nothing today. But it comes back to the same thing in antiquity where people can't just go in your home. Your chief couldn't just go in your home and start rifling through your crap. If he did, you had every right to kill him. Like
you kind of do today if they do it.
Yes.
But I won't touch on this too much because it kind of ties back into the one we did before, but I will say this. I'm noticing something with these is what they've done is without getting rid of the amendment, the American government has made most of them meaningless. And interestingly enough, they've drawn your attention mostly to the Second Amendment, which, yes, do not let them get rid of that. That is when they have you enslaved. But the Second Amendment is basically smoke and mirrors, so you don't notice that they've completely chipped away at all of them, and including the second one, because here's the thing is, it's keep and bear arms. Not keep and bear guns, it's keep and bear arms. Whether that's a chainsaw, whether that's a sword, whether that's a knife, a throwing dagger, a gun, a bazooka, a cannon, a feral-trained badger on the end of a stick, whatever. Well, that was a joke actually stolen from Futurama, the Franklinator. But that is something to keep in mind, is they've already watered these down in the intent of trying to take them away. And this is not just something that America did. What this was done was basically in order to give a roadblock to the inevitably corrupt government that would show up. Because here's the thing. Corrupt governments in European Christian nations are nothing new. I mean, frick, the English pretty much just had one all the time. It's just how bad was it? But getting into Amendment 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation.
Right. So in heathen days, when we ruled the land, if I was to accuse, I'll use the Lord Keeper because he's here with me. If I was to accuse the Lord Keeper of some heinous crime, like, I don't know, raping kitty cats, I had to do so in public. I couldn't just do whispers around and then get the people to turn their back on him through manipulation and, basically take all of his stuff away. Because I would then be at fault, which would lead to, I believe it's actually the next amendment. But yeah, everything has to be done publicly and stuff can't just be taken away from people. It goes along with that presumption of innocence until guilt is proven.
Which doesn't exist right now.
It hasn't existed in a long time.
No, the moment, I mean, I think that it was captured fairly well in Discworld series, where everyone will just be like, oh yes, he's definitely guilty. Just look at him. Just look at his eyes. So shifty looking. 2 weeks later when they're acquitted, I knew he was innocent the whole time. That's just how a lot of people's brains work. Basically, they're hedging their bets that they can say that, and then they'll just change their opinion. Why? Because they want to be right. But this whole thing is basically trying to protect you from having the court system used against you. Mm-hmm. And that is what we've kind of got going on today.
Right. So, like, basically the witch trials. It makes the witch trials illegal. I can't tie you up and throw you in a hole until you admit your guilt. I can't take all your stuff from you because you're in the hole. And, well, you wouldn't be in the hole if you wasn't guilty. It basically eliminates the whole witch trial process.
And I feel like I need to mention this. So, one of the ways that you could have your guilt proven at a trial was if your wife wasn't crying.
Oh, that's the witch trials.
Yeah,
Specify the witch trials.
The witch trials. If your wife wasn't crying when you were at your trial. So basically, if your woman wouldn't go, just bawling, that the fact that you're even in a trial was proof that you were a witch. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense they would use to prove things. But, and this isn't anything new or old. For instance, there's the Satanic Panic in the 80s. There's still people in prison for that. And it's because once you have the mob rule mentality, everything's out the window. And here's the thing is, a mob is a lot easier to stir up if you have a herd instead of a pack. That's why they want so many sheep instead of wolves. Got anything else you want to mention on this? Move on to 6. Amendment 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense.
This actually, in many cases, actually ties back to the rules of duels. If there's something that bad, I can't just go and strike you from behind. I can't. In some cases, champions were allowed, right? There was professional champions where this dude, that's what he does. He fights in these trial by combat for people that can't or won't do it on them for themselves, depending on the time period, because there's a lot you have to take into consideration, time periods, and the closer to now, the more corrupt it becomes. That's the way it seems to go in general. But let's say that there is one of these champions that fights these duels. He can't just come up to you and be like, I was sent here to trial by combat, and just start swinging at you. No, because then he goes down. He's going to go down because somebody will come after him. So basically it was, I had, in this case, again, I have to actually publicly accuse the lore keeper of doing something very naughty that allows for this trial by combat, or if the rules get kind of weird, but sometimes it's trial by combat. Sometimes there's a choice of trial by peer. Sometimes there's a variety of different trials that could be performed. But the accusations has to be public. Like, I did it. Not just what the accusation is, which is how they do it now, but the person themselves coming forward and saying, I accuse so-and-so of this thing.
Yes, and again, it ties into not letting the government railroad you. A lot of these are pretty much just protecting the people from the government infringing on their rights.
Well, and crooked-ass cowards.
Yeah, because that's another thing that's fairly common. Like Antiphony is not above using threats to get the result they want from relatively innocent people. Nor is Blam. So...
And they've done it before.
Yeah, and we could keep going on this for quite a while. And intimidation of these sorts of things is nothing new. And this actually brings to another thing, which is the impartial jury part. Because I want to bring this up before I move on. This is actually important. You have to have people that cannot directly be affected. Right now in this country, there is no way you could have gotten an impartial jury for many of these cases because they were national news and everything is so polarized. I mean, frick, Subway, because they hired
Jerry.
Not Jerry, not the pedophile, the purple-haired female.
Pedophile because he wasn't convicted.
Oh, accused pedophile. I didn't keep up with the case because I didn't really care about Subway. And
I didn't either, but once stuff hits public, I have to follow it.
Oh, okay. So good for you for keeping on that stuff. I know that they tend to throw that around. But there's I don't remember her name, but it was the purple-haired woman on the women's soccer team that is one of those kneeling for the flags, fuck America sort of types. And there's like a huge divide where like Subway is just apps like the franchisees, because each franchise is not actually owned by the big company. It's basically a pyramid scheme if you actually look into how franchises actually seem to be run. But the franchises are suffering because Subway took the money of the franchises to hire this woman to be in their ads. And now there's this huge polarization where red states are effectively starting to boycott Subway, and there's not a lot of problems in blue states. And the red state owners are just like, why didn't you just talk about the bread? Why did you get a frickin' person who's known for having political views one way or the other? Like, how you do something affects all of them. And everything is an argument now. And I'm not trying to chastise one side or the other or anything. I'm literally just saying it is hard to get an impartial jury now, because literally anything that goes to court is inherently going to have a political divide. That's how things are working. The false tribalism is in full effect.
Well, and as far as everything being political, this is the closest that we've had to a political show. Well, other than the one time I lost my temper because people thought that we was completely oblivious to what's going on in the world, and then I flexed, which people didn't like for some reason. But anyways, we have been accused of being political because we make stances like men are men and women are women. Men are physically stronger than women. Women can give birth, men cannot. Because we say things like this, everything now is political. And really, it shouldn't be.
Well, it reminds me of that joke in South Park where Mrs. Garrison's fancy new vagina, I think is the episode, where Mr. Garrison literally just gets a sex change operation because he wants to get an abortion. That was the character. He was horrible. He was a horrible human being. But he finds out, he can't get pregnant, nor can he get a period because he just is a person with a mangled penis. Mm-hmm. And that's just the reality of it. And I don't personally care if someone's offended by that. You're just a person with a mangled penis. Anyway, moving on to number 7. In suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law.
Weregild thing. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much just weregild. And we've been over this before in other shows where we talk about how there's different... prison is a Christian invention. You didn't really tend to hold people very long if you held them at all. You basically had weregild, which was basically recompense. There was straight up execution. There was basically exiling someone, making them an outlaw.
Which would cause the loss of property.
Yes. And finally...
To which they had to pay, by the way.
Yes. And then lastly, there's thraldom, which was usually reserved for not too bad crimes. Basically,
And not the same thing as a slave.
No, thrall, I guess the better term would be like adult foster child, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
It's hard to really convey it with modern words.
The village idiot. The one that you don't trust because he's either a thief or he's just stupid. So you don't trust him to make good decisions for himself or anybody else. But he's still his own guy. That's basically what a thrall is.
Yes. And this is it's something that people need to understand is, here's the thing. In the North, you don't have completely useless people. You call those corpses. So having just people whose job is a full-on slave, even the quote-unquote slaves in the Roman Empire were actually treated better, not always, but on average,
better than we are today.
Better than we are today. In fact, there's a great line from, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's from Small Gods by Terry Pratchett, where the character who's part of like that world's version of Christianity or Islam, it's complicated. Basically, it's a stand-in for Abrahamism. He's in a parallel to the Greek world, and he's talking to someone who's a slave, and he's like, don't you want to be free? He's like, oh, no, I'm going to run away. And he's like, oh, great. Where to? Well, I'm going to go off for about 2 weeks and basically have a vacation. Then I'll come back. And he's like, wait, what? Yeah. And then he's like, I don't have to. And then the slave talks about how he doesn't have to lift heavy things. He gets several weeks off. He doesn't have to work all the time. And he basically has all his needs cared for. And there are people that would rather be taken care of than be their own person. And that's how you end up with thralls. But then there's also examples, like there's a story of the Spartan child who was made a slave, and the first thing he did when he was asked to go get a glass of water was smash his own head in on the wall. Yeah, there's a mindset required to be a thrall.
Because he was from a warrior tribe.
Yeah, warriors are not slaves.
They make horrible slaves.
Yes.
And soldiers.
Yes. Well, soldiers are to have to do what they're told. Warriors fight for a purpose. It's an of their own. That's an oversimplified concept, but it's all we can do with the time we have. But the reason I bring that up is those were the ways that things were punished. Because here's the thing: is prisons are literally just it's like taxing your life till you die.
Well, it's an open secret because it's not hidden, so it's in the open. That is legitimately why prison, even here in the U.S., where me and the Lord Keeper are from, that's actually why prisons were created, was so that the person would have time to reflect on what they did wrong, on their sins, and then make good with God. And it's open history.
Same shit with the AA system.
Oh, yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally written into their rule. If it worked for you, good for you.
12 steps.
12 steps. If it worked for you, good for you, but it's really obvious it's a Christian recruitment tool. So is prison. That's why so many people become religious in prison. That's why there's usually churches in prisons, and now there's mosques. And where are a lot of Muslims recruiting, for various things, including the religion? Prisons.
Fastest growing religion in prisons.
Yes. Which there are some pagans in prison, and many of them are there for crimes that a self-respecting white person would consider just cause.
Right. I mean, there's the full spectrum for everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's also some absolute sickos in there, but it's like killing someone for self-defense. We don't personally view that as a crime. The government apparently does. But moving into Amendment 8, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. And we just actually kind of covered that one.
Yes, torture, bad. Prison, bad. Really, that's what it comes down to. It's because that's cruel and unusual punishment. They might not have actually meant those things, but I strongly suspect that they actually did. Because even in the colonial period of America, they would exile people to the wilds. Rather than going to prison, you're executed or you're exiled, or you have to pay off some kind of fine.
Well, and this brings us to another interesting thing, which is in America, there is a large amount of people that got kicked out of Europe. And a lot of people will go like, oh, they were criminals. Yeah, they were criminals because they were witches or they were some random Christian sect. And there's Christian sects in America that basically got exiled in America. I'm looking at you, Mormonism, with your top hat gold plates reading Magic underwear thing. Anyway, and there's all these different types, including debtors, or in some cases, mercenaries that were hired and shipped over. Like, it's actually acknowledged in the history books that one of the reasons we were able to push past the Appalachians was all the Scotch-Irish that came over here. And they just basically were like, yeah, we're going to go into the mountains and take what we want. And that's what happened. But we've already covered this one mostly, so I'm going to go to number 9. Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people.
I am sorry, I had my headset on and I couldn't hear what you just said.
Beautiful. So let's go ahead and repeat that. And this one's actually important. All of them are important, but this one's important-er in a way. Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people.
In other words, they can't make up new rules that undo the old rules. In particular, the first 10 rules. And yet, that has oddly been ignored. Just ignored. Because, let's say with the Second Amendment, which in my opinion, the most important amendment because it protects the other 9. Okay, you can have any weapon, but the part that makes it function, you can't have. What? I definitely infringed, even though you can have an M60 Gatling gun mounted to an Apache helicopter, but the Apache helicopter, which has a chain that makes the prop go around, well, you can't have that chain. And the firing pin for the M60, well, you can't have that either. Or the trigger, or the stick, or the ignition switch. That's infringement. Infringement on number 2, which protects the rest of these. They should not legally be able to make rules that goes against the first 10 rules.
Yes, and I actually want to bring something up. Is some of the rights he's mentioning here are actually in the Constitution or other founding documents, not just the amendments. Because they
all work together.
Yes, they all work together. And the main thing with these 10 amendments and the Constitution and all that was not to give people rights. These do not give you rights. They're basically telling you, you have these rights by divine right, by the right of your very existence.
By being alive.
Yes. And here's the thing is, while I wouldn't go so far as to say the founding fathers were what we would probably consider pagan, maybe one or two of them were, who knows. But a lot of them were not Christian. Frickin' Thomas Jefferson cut up the New Testament so it was a book of philosophy rather than a religious text.
Because he actually despised Christianity.
Yes. So when they use God, they're using it more in the metaphysical, symbolic sense, not the actual Christian God, which I know some people will get pissed about, but yeah, it's like, I have no problem. Even me, I'm pagan. I'm not a big fan of Christianity. I will use HE double hockey sticks hell rather than lovely death goddess hell as metaphor. Because, yeah, some things are frickin' like hell.
Well, hell and the realm of hell, 2 different things. Hell, which is with the 2 L's, that one is the Christian notion and the slang that goes with that. The realm of hell is something completely different, which is a pagan concept. And specifically a Hyperborean concept.
Well, and also, there is an argument that hell would have 2 L's in some regional tongues, but it's pronounced the same, so who the frick cares? I'm going to stick to 1 L just because it differentiates, because that does get annoying. But basically, these rights are divine. This isn't a situation. What you're doing, if someone decides to infringe on any of these amendments or anything that's written in these things, is actually taking away rights ordained by divine providence, by the very act of being a living, breathing thing. They're not taking away things that were written down. They're removing the protections to make sure you kept what you were supposed to have in the first place, what was infringed on by corrupt governments in other parts of the world. And they were trying to avoid having happen here. Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people.
Yeah, in other words, the High King, he can't tell the villages what to do. But the villages can decide for themselves what to do. So, yeah, that's basically what that is.
Well, it's like someone, I forget who said this, but it's not an original quote from me. Before the Civil War, it was the United States are. After the Civil War, it's the United States is. Before that, war happened. The United States was United States. States was synonymous with country. You were an American, but you were also a Virginian. You were an American, but you were also a Vermonter. You were an American.
The way it was described was actually state first, country second. That's the way it used to actually be described. Now it's country first and state maybe.
Well, and we're supposed to actually function as each state is supposed to be its own thing. And for the longest time, it actually was. Like, if you look...
About 1960s, it was still mostly followed.
Yeah, you can actually look up, like, stuff during the New Deal. Not the Green New Deal, the New Deal. Where, like, artists and folklorists and, like, cultural studiers, researchers, whatever, they would go out and they would find stuff. So you have all this art that comes out around this time. You also have all this folklore that's collected of like Paul Bunyan, Joe McGarrick, things of that nature. And you also have, there's actually a book I read, which is actually like the different cuisines across America at the time. And yes, there's some favorites that have stuck around. But yeah, if you went to different areas, it was a radically different cuisine from one region to the next. And this used to be the case. Like, America used to be many different countries within one. And it's only recently faded, and the United States government had a specific hand in it. Because there were various regional movements. Like my home state, the most famous painter from Iowa is Grant Wood. He's a famous regionalist painter. He painted sort of that whole thing. And oddly enough, the last 100 years is also when most of the best artists were relegated to commercial art. Your Norman Rockwells, your Frank Frazettas, your Seb McKinnons, your Aethelwolfs. Like Aethelwolf, who's our friend. Fantastic artist. He's mostly relegated to doing stuff for us or other people. Not that he doesn't do fantastic work there. Commission work. There's no patrons. There's no... Oh, wow. Awesome.
Well, comic book artists, all those.
Oh, yeah. Like, some of the best artists that have come out were comic book artists. Like, they had probably some of the best decisions stylized in their art. Like, the line work, the paint work, the design. And these are all things that got relegated to the side. Norman Rockwell is probably one of the best American artists to come out in the last 100 years. And he has to be playing second fiddle to Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol, who are jokes in comparison to what Norman Rockwell could do. And the sheer amount the motherfucker did. Like, Norman Rockwell produced so many, I can't even keep track of them all. I mean, just Santa Claus alone, he did like 50.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And
popularized the modern image
of Santa Claus, because before that, yes, there were versions of Santa Claus that had a red suit. That was more like the Sinterklaas style Santa Claus. But there was also Father Christmas, who originally had more of like a white robe sort of thing going on.
one with a green.
There's a green one. There's a blue one, which is actually more common now in like the Slavic areas with their god Ded Moroz. And then you have brown, which was like the fur-covered ones, which like Belsnickel, which means it's usually translated as fur-covered Nicholas and furs. But here's the thing: is Nicholas is a Niclas is a obscure word for elf. So Belsnickel could actually basically mean fur-covered elf, which just basically meant a kind of spirit. So anyways, what I'm getting at is the American culture that was founded was a continuation, and you can see, hopefully, through these 10 amendments that we've talked about, that it was basically trying to guarantee what would have been considered pagan rights to the people. And it would be a whole nother show for us to go into the different pagan stuff. I mean, frick, who is it that fought the bear? Is it Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone, or is it both?
Well, both, but Davy Crockett is the one that killed the bear at 9 years old.
Yeah, that kid's a frickin' berserker.
Yes.
That's effectively what that story is. And it's American folklore. Yes, it's set in the time where we had suits and ties and cowboy hats and coonskin hats and rifles, but it's just as pagan as the stuff over in Europe.
The time when dreams and legends walked the earth.
Yes. And I think that is something that we're trying to convey here is this was originally supposed to be, as a country, the continuation of all these various things. You know, you have unique versions of European cultures over here. You have the Pennsylvania Dutch, you have the Cajuns. Those are some of the obvious ones.
I don't think in these ones there's a separation of church and state, is there? That's in the other set?
I think that's the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press.
There's somewhere where it expressly prohibits it.
That might be later then. I'm not
It's
sure.
probably in a different document then. I get them mixed up, to be honest.
Oh, everybody does. Everybody does who's not.
Have we gone through them all yet?
Yep, we did all 10.
Okay. Well, which is good because we're right towards the tail end. We got about 5 minutes
So I will go ahead and say, first of all, whatever country you're in, know your rights and know when they've been crossed. Second of all is we are our ethnic faith by default. And here's something I actually want to tell people. The gods are our ancestors, whether that is a divine being that was cast in human form, which does happen in some stories, or in some cases in swan form. Zeus was a bit raunchy. Or in other cases, ascended ancestors like Asclepius, or I think Saxonot is sometimes argued, Svetoslav. I mix those up sometimes. You are pagan by default, not because of any religious, but because of blood ties. And as a result, it's going to happen. Everything in our culture is drenched in it. Even the Christian stuff, as twisted and as used against us as it is, if you take off the veneer, it's covering up something pagan because the church couldn't get rid of it. And with that, I'm going to say, know your rights, and all my fellow freemen, be armed.
Yes, because that's my suggestion. Even if you're not in America, don't have the Second Amendment. Figure out a way to imitate it, and then exercise it to the fullest of your ability. So that doesn't just mean in America where you can own firearms. And I know that there's a lot of countries that don't have Second Amendment and you can still own firearms. Bravo. Get them. It doesn't just mean owning it and leaving it in the closet. It means knowing how to actually use the weapon, how to take it apart, clean it, put it back together, oil it, maintain it, how it operates, having the ammunition for it, being able to shoot in a straight line, Tex. All these things matter. How to walk and march and run and duck and hide and cover. Express all of these that you can to the fullest of your ability, so that we can protect the other 9, which are effectively the rules of our religion. Religion is a bad name. It's a bad word, but it's one that most people can understand. It is a way to protect our ethnic faith and who we are as a people. So then on that note, I am going to say, keep your head down and your powder dry, because this shit's coming.